Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Once again, thank you for joining us today on What's the CO2. I'm your host, Matt Martinez, and today we have a very special guest joining us. I was so thrilled when I found out he was available to come aboard. Ross Moffat. Ross, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a fun time.
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
So your background, I like to always kind of dive into more of the personal notes of anyone that I have on, just because I think it just provides a little bit more meaning and depth to the conversation that we have later on. You're not from here, born and raised in Scotland, so Des Moines, Iowa, Scotland. How do those two pair up? Let's get a bit of the forest for the trees here.
I know. It does seem like a leap, doesn't it? Yeah, so I did, like you mentioned, I grew up in Glasgow, Scotland. I grew up in a town called Clydebank, which is a shipbuilding town, kind of a working class place. Played a lot of soccer there, and soccer is really the vehicle that connects Clydebank to Des Moines, Iowa. I spent a lot of time playing soccer as a kid and ended up being fairly good at it, where I kind of jumped from high school right into a professional soccer career, which I spent 3 years doing that after high school, which then, as that kind of come to an end for a few reasons, which I don't know if we don't really need to get into, but I ultimately wasn't quite good enough to stay at that level. Uh, the opportunity to play collegiate soccer here in Des Moines, Iowa popped up, and I would love to say that it was a premeditated plan or something, but at that time, I had just my professional career was sort of deteriorating, and I needed something different. I was actually a little bit lost, if I'm being truly honest, and the jump to Des Moines, Iowa was a little bit of a last resort, and I made the jump and ended up at Grandview College. It's now Grandview University, but it was so long ago. It was Grandview College at the time in 2002, and so the long story short is that soccer is the vehicle.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So then, how did you hear about who contacted you about playing over here? And
Right.
then how'd that come across?
I know it sounds. So what happened was my contract over there at the team I was at in Scotland was coming to an end. They informed me that I was not going to get a contract renewal, and that was in May 2002. And so my entire identity, as you can imagine, it had been around soccer. It was what I spent most of my time doing it as a child. In my work as a therapist, I'd start to look at what kind of things helped us belong as kids, what kind of things helped keep us safe as kids, what kind of thing made us feel significant or brought us reward. And soccer was that tenfold in all of those areas for me. And so the idea of not being a soccer player was quite terrifying. Maybe not terrifying, but definitely disorientating. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And so there was a guy starting an agency, and he said, "Hey, you want me to contact some coaches and see if anybody?" And then the next thing I know, I'm in my little house in Clydebank, Scotland, and I've got all these coaches contacting me, and I know nothing about collegiate soccer. I know nothing about D1, D2, any. I literally know nothing, and they're all contact. And so the only reason I ended up in Des Moines, shout out to Blair Reed. He was the coach at Grandview at the time and was for 30 plus years, I believe. There was a couple things. One, he had some money freed up because somebody had just bailed on him, and I needed some financial support to make this thing happen. So that was one reason. That's the less fun reason. But also, Blair made me feel really comfortable. He made me feel like, you know what, I can get on this plane, and if it all goes wrong, this guy's gonna make sure I'm okay. Ultimately. And so it was a huge leap of faith. Yeah, I got on that plane and was in Des Moines, Iowa. The first couple of days were rough because none of the other players were there. And I'm in this little dorm. Felt like a prison cell. And, I remember I cried that first night. I felt like I had a couple $100, some clothes, knew nobody in the entire country.
Welcome to college,
I
bro.
know,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "What have I done?" I really was I was thinking, "What have I done?" But then, 20 other guys show up, and at that time, that whole team was international, so all of a sudden, you're with 20 other guys that also got on a plane, that also left home, and the soccer thing, once you start playing, no matter what sport it is, any athlete will understand this. It's like a universal language, right? And then you've got your boys, and you've got a mission, and you're going. And the soccer itself was really important for me at the time. I had lost some confidence. I had just been released, and the game here was perfect for me. It's a little slower here, the actual game of soccer compared to the Scottish Premier League, which is super physical, super fast. And so I got my rhythm back. I was in the team right away. The coach put a lot of faith in me as a key player, and that was that. I was off and running. Now, even then, I didn't think I would be sitting here talking to you 24 years later. I mean, I was still thinking I'll play for a couple years or a season or two and then go back. So it's just amazing how life unfolds sometimes.
So how old are you at the time when you came over to Des
I
Moines?
was 19.
19.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Okay. So then your Scottish Premier League years were what,
16
16
to
to
19.
19?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
pretty young.
So are you playing through high school
Yeah,
with or
yeah.
yeah?
So I played. When I think back to my childhood, it just all sort of revolves around soccer, for better or worse. We can talk about the negatives of that. I see some of that in my work. I played nonstop, but I love. I was so lucky. I used to go home from school, throw my bag in, and then just play in the street or in the park until the street lights came on, and then you had to go home. And then just through that, playing in the street. So it was very different than here. I wasn't even on an actual team until I was about 9 or 10. Um, I was just playing street soccer. And then through that, I eventually got on a couple of teams. And then through that, professional scouts and things like that started noticing me at high school games and things like that. And I went on, I had a really fun time. I went to all different places around Britain on trial and traveled around and stuff. At 14, 15, I was playing really, really well. That was probably peaked at 15, if I'm being honest. And yeah, and then so I mean, when you're 16 and somebody says, "Hey, do you want to be a full time professional soccer player?" You just yeah, hunt, you know what you're gonna do, right? Of course, absolutely. So yeah, it wasn't all glamour and glitz. It was when you're playing at that level. It's not the Premier League. You're not making millions of dollars. It's pretty cutthroat. You need to have a real thick skin to be able to handle that level and stay at that level.
Let's kinda jump around then because this was gonna be a topic for later
Hmm.
on, but since I feel like we're kind of already on that topic. Uh, Being 16, I mean, I guess by our US definition, you're still a sophomore in high school
Yeah, I
at this
suppose so.
point.
Yeah, I've actually never thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I I can't imagine. I was an athlete in high school too, but, like, I can't imagine, like, competing on, like, a collegiate type of environment at that age. I mean, what did you even know at that point, like, just how huge that was? Or you're just kinda like, "Oh, I'm 16, like, let's just go." Um, did you know the pressure that was on you? I don't know if pressure is even the right
I
word, but
think that's a great question because it's a little bit of both. I felt like I was good enough to have been offered the contract and be a part of it, but where I really struggled was being in and around the first team, established pros, guys that I had watched on TV growing up. And that's where I think the imposter syndrome stuff really kicked in. So when I was with the youth team, the other guys that were in the same position as me, I was like, no, I belong here. But then that next step up was you. There was quite a few guys from that came in with me that went on and became established pros. And the thing that I always admired about them is they just didn't have that. They just I was almost too analytical. I was almost too, do I really belong here? Am I really that guy? Whereas they were just like bulls in a china shop, like, okay, here comes the new guy. I'm the man. And sometimes you kinda need that, you know? You kinda need that. Sometimes that you can be overly analytical and it can almost get in your way, whether it's, professional sports or I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that could attest to that even with, "Do I really deserve that promotion?" Or, "Am I really the guy that should have that job?" Or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you just need to take the leap and believe in yourself, but at that moment, I was young. There was guys that I had were sort of heroes of mine, and I just yeah, that was tough for me. That was I wasn't quite sure enough of myself in those moments.
I don't know much about soccer. I mean, like, born and raised in the US, I grew up in Texas, and so it's a different culture there. I didn't grow up around it. But from what, like, I've seen, it does seem like that's still kind of the norm, right? Like 16-year-olds, 15 even, like, they're as soon as, like, somebody sees that you've got talent, especially overseas, it's like, "Hey, like, we need to scoop you up."
Right.
Is that still kind of the mentality
It
for that?
is. It is, and they will cast a fairly wide net compared to the people that actually stay there. And so I think that's the kicker, right? You can get in, but it's really hard to stay in. And I think some young people feel like at 16, if they get noticed, they've made it, and it's like, no, this is just the start, you know. I think that's the hard part.
What do you see as some of the struggles about that, like, being so young and then being thrown into a really competitive career? I mean, especially as a youth at that age. I
Right.
mean, what are I mean, like you said, there are some positives to it. I mean, especially if you've got the skills, but I mean, what are some of the drawbacks about that at such
Ah,
an early age?
so many drawbacks. And what I would say is if you have made it that far, you've probably immersed yourself in the sport throughout your life, right? People probably know you as the soccer guy, the baseball guy. Oh, that's Matt. He's so good. And the big piece for me is like I said before, through my work as a therapist, I really start to notice not just athletes, but those things that help people feel safe or feel significant or feel belonging. And for any good athlete, the sport becomes the vehicle to that. And so you kind of hang your hat on it. You're immersed in it and it does become your identity. And so that's all well and good until the sport isn't serving you in that way anymore. And let's say you get a long term injury or, maybe your performance just drops or you don't quite make it to the next step. Well, then that's when people get very lost because this vehicle that they've used for belonging, acceptance, significance is no longer serving them in that way, and they become very unsure of who they are, and that's a dangerous place to be because athletes in those moments haven't really developed other tools to feel significant or accepted or connected. It's always been the sport, and so I find that with the work I do in my office, especially when I work with athletes, it's a big part of parsing apart your sport and your identity as an athlete and who you are as a human because they very quickly become one and the same. And from a mental health perspective, that can be a little bit dangerous.
As as a you're a parent, you've got kids now.
Yeah.
They're involved, right, in
Yeah.
youth sports. So, as a parent and also as a counselor, are you already kind of starting to shape them in this sense of like, "Hey, this is what I went through. I don't want the same type of identity situation to happen
Yeah.
with them." But you're also involved in just youth soccer in the area,
Sure.
just in general, right?
Absolutely.
So, what are some things that you do personally, but then also for the parents out there that, that do have kids and they're like, "Oh, this like my kid's pretty good." Or, obviously every parent wants their kid to succeed, but um any tools, anything that you've developed to help grow just a well-balanced mindset for that child?
Yeah. It's an ongoing process. And what I would say is it's much more important the behaviors you modeled and what you say. These times where you sit down and you kind of have these father son lectures, a lot of that stuff is going to just fall by the wayside compared to something as important as feeling securely attached to your caregiver. So what happens is, talk about one of the one of the most important things in terms of significance and connection is in your formative years is that of to your caregivers. And so if you have a dad who is an athlete and your son or your daughter, in my case, I have 4 boys. So I think about my son and he knows I'm an athlete and he knows I love soccer and he knows that I'm also in the soccer community. There's a mechanism in his head at some point, he developed the circuitry to think, oh, if I'm good at soccer and I perform well, then I will get more praise, reward, connection, acceptance from dad. And so I'm literally fighting against that circuitry. And so sometimes it's an ongoing process for us too. He happens to actually be an advanced little soccer player. And I tell him all the time, hey, soccer's just a thing we do, it's not who we are. It's not anything to do with you and I, and obviously the scary part is when it feels like a father's love is conditional. I'm I'm acceptable and approved of by my dad when I play well, when I score a goal, when I get a hit. And even if the father doesn't feel that way, but at some point in their child's formative years, they've kind of developed that mechanism. You can feel like you're swimming up a waterfall. And sometimes there has been times where I've been having those talks and I feel like it's landed. And then right away it comes out differently on game day or something like that. So it's definitely an ongoing process. But the main thing is just continuing to parse apart the sport and the human. And the love is unconditional. The love is no matter what. And it takes ongoing messaging, especially if you do have a son or a daughter that's an athlete, and you're fighting against it because what happens when somebody's competent or good at their sport? They get all these messages. They feel good. Everybody celebrates. Great job! You played so well. Wow, you scored a hat trick. They're like, okay, more of that, please. And so you're kind of fighting against that all the time. So yeah, I would love to say, oh, here's the framework for all parents. It's complicated. You can say whatever you want, but you have to keep in mind that you are competing against circuitry that children have developed, even in the years 0 to 2, where if they're doing certain behaviors or performing in a certain way and they feel like it brings them safety, belonging, and significance, well, that's way more powerful than a freaking father son chat at the end of the night. It's going to take a little more than that. So it's an ongoing process. So, yeah, with parents, recognizing their own activation, their own anxiety. A lot of the times, whether we want to or not, we do live vicariously through our kids, mostly because we don't want to see our kids struggle. So if they're struggling, we feel it. So that's what I would say to parents is don't worry too much about the chats or what you say. Manage yourself. Notice your own anxiety. Notice what's going on in your own body, and don't allow those feelings to drive your behaviors or your actions, because that will imprint. So as long as the main goal for a parent, I would say, is to manage. If you manage yourself and you stay regulated, then there's a very good chance that the child will also stay regulated. They will sense if you're anxious. If you're anxious because they're struggling, they will mirror that. Their little nervous systems will naturally mirror that. So it's complicated stuff. It is. It's more complicated than just saying the right thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, do you think we sometimes take it too far as a culture? I mean, this isn't even in the US, this is worldwide. Um, when we by placing so much of a heavy emphasis on youth sports, or it I mean, it's a really fine balance, I feel like, because obviously I think the answer is yes, but at the same time, I mean, you're privy to this too. I mean, sports is perhaps one of the better developmental tools
100%.
we have. So, like, where do we walk that line?
It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very tough because youth sports are a wonderful vehicle, aren't they? Talk about creating a little microcosm environment where you can learn how to be on a team, learn how to be coached, learn how to persevere, learn how to deal with adversity. It's like a little breeding ground for life in some ways. And that's why, I mean, I'm not a CEO or anything, but I know a lot of CEOs that like to hire athletes because they know that they've been there. They've had to have discipline. They've had to work hard. They've had to work with others. And so I think that's what you're referring to. There's a lot of good, so much good. Where do we pass that threshold and it becomes too much? I think it would be fair to say that we're a little overscheduled. And I think that kids need time to be kids sometimes. They need time to, I mean, I was really lucky. I grew up in an environment where I was playing soccer, but not in an organized soccer. Not you have to get in the car and go here and listen to this coach. I was just playing in an unstructured way. And we don't have enough of that. Everyone's so overscheduled that even if you kept your kid home and said, hey, just go out and play soccer or football or baseball, they'd be like, well, all the other kids are at, practice. And so I think we miss that. I think kids need unstructured time. And there's also benefit. You might remember it from being a kid, but there's also benefit from being outside playing sports with your friends in the neighborhood. And you got to work out rules. You got to, there's a little pecking order. Maybe there's a controversial moment and you got to sort it out yourself. You don't have an adult figure giving you all the solutions all the time. So I think we miss that. I think the kids are too busy. Sometimes they just need to rest or play tag or, that kind of thing. And the other thing that's a little concerning is because all of the sports have become so comprehensive, it almost pushes the envelope on specializing too soon. Even if it's competitive dance or gymnastics, all of a sudden soccer's year round, all of a sudden basketball's year round, if you want it to be. And I think that's tough because we don't need 7, 8, 9 year olds picking a sport. They should have the opportunity to continue to play different sports. Even if they have a favorite, there's still a lot of benefit from being in those other environments, even just for their own physical development. So the overscheduling and the early specialization are two areas that I feel like, whoa, we've gone a little bit too far here. And I understand that as a parent, you start to kind of feel like you have to keep up, right? You don't want your player to fall behind or your son or daughter to fall behind. And there's all this pressure, and a lot of the clubs have become really good at marketing and promotion. And there's 1,000,001 camps and programs and private training. And I think sometimes parents feel the pressure of that and just keep going and going and going. And so I think it's on us as parents to be able to. My wife's good. She's much better than me. She helps me push the brakes a little bit and zoom out and look at the long-term pathway and the family balance and all of that stuff. I think it's getting tougher and tougher for families to manage. And there's a lot of misinformation too. I think people are just confused. They feel like they have to sign up for everything, and that's not necessarily true.
You had mentioned earlier very briefly three things: safety, belonging, and significance, otherwise known as the adaptation
Hmm.
triangle. Can you walk us through that framework? Like, what's so important about that that triangle?
Yeah,
What does it say about our mindset?
I love that. That's a great question, Matt. So, as you know, I'm a therapist and I spend a lot of time predominantly with men, but with people on my couch. And what I started to notice is out of those three things, as children, we employ mechanisms that keep us there. So if it keeps you safe to be angry, we will develop that mechanism. If it keeps you safe to be a people pleaser or shut down, we will do that. And the same with significance and acceptance. What helps you feel connected to your peer group? You know, what helps you to not get bullied at school, or and then significance is praise and reward. What you know, when is the only time daddy says he's proud of me? Well, when I get straight A's. So and so then we start to develop these. I mean, in therapy, you could call it negative cognitions. I just like to call them adaptations. We develop these, we adapt to an environment in a way that helps get us through, right? And so, you know, that's where we develop these behavioral drivers, and and what happens is they work, right? If it works to be a people pleaser, well, you're going to keep doing it. And so what happens is we get through our formative years with all these adaptations that we've employed, but we're kids, so we're not. It's not conscious. We're not calculating like, okay, I'm going to wake up and be a people. We will just default to the things that work. And so then we move towards adulthood, environments change, new relationships, we get into the workforce or college, etc. And what happens is anytime we feel like we're under duress or stress, scientific terms, we move from parasympathetic to sympathetic, kind of fight or flight stuff. What happens is we default to those adaptations that have worked. And so the problem is we're no longer 5 years old trying to deal with mom and dad in a volatile household. Now I'm trying to have a romantic relationship, or I'm trying to keep a job. And so those adaptations that served us so well and got us through and helped us survive, all of a sudden are maladaptive. They're getting in the way, they're sabotaging things. And that's what really throws people off. And so a big part of the work that I do is helping. So sometimes a man will just come in and he'll just say, I'm here because my wife says I'm angry all the time, or something like that. And that's all I need. That's all. I don't in that first session, I don't need to go through your whole childhood, but okay, so if anger is the thing that's manifesting in the here and now in a complicated way and it's getting in the way, let's use that as the trailhead and explore that. And so what we'll do is, what I like to do at least, is kind of map that. Okay, when did you learn to be angry? Who showed you that? Who taught you that? When did that keep you safe? And we start to work through that. And then maybe we'll go to honoring that. Okay, do you see how that was a good thing? And so it could be anger, it could be people pleasing, could be sometimes it's something very nuanced and complicated that's very specific to that person's environment. And with men, a lot of the time it's not enoughness. A lot of men don't feel enough. I see that with the athletes, and that not enough drivers are really interesting one, because if every time you feel under duress, you make yourself feel not enough. It works really well for a while. It's like, I don't feel enough. Well, let me go practice hitting. I feel not enough. Well, let me go get smarter. Let me go get this straight A's. Watch this. And people use it to drive them to performance. And then eventually you get to adulthood and you constantly, maybe every time you feel that you move to that sympathetic place, you pull out that not enough card and you spend a lot of your time as a dad or as a husband or in the workforce feeling inadequate or not enough. And so you never quite have the positive cascade of emotions of, I am enough. This is great. I feel grateful. I feel connected. You constantly just feel like you haven't done enough and you need to do more. And so that's really the work that I love to do, is like, okay, what is the sticky point? What is the friction? Let's go figure out, where did that come from? How did that serve you? And let's honor that. But then also now let's figure out how to pause and select a more adaptive response. That not enough thing, or that anger thing, or that people pleasing thing, that's okay, but it is okay to put it back in the toolbox and select a different tool. Let's pick something that works for the new circumstances. Sometimes I use the analogy of a chainsaw, right? So maybe your anger is like a chainsaw. Well, is a chainsaw useful? Yes, if you're trying to trim some branches or take a tree down. But if I need you to hang up a picture on my wall, well, we don't need to just default to the chainsaw. It's going to be destructive. And people do that in life. They just default to the tool that used to work without pausing and actually assessing the new job. What is the actual tool that works here? And so that's where people, that's really the work that I do. And that framework seems to work really well with men because it's not too, we're not unpacking every layer of trauma that ever happened. It's just, it's very actionable for men. Okay, here's what's going on. Here's what you're doing, and here's the action steps. Go get some reps. Go work on that, and that seems to work really well. And I don't even remember your initial question. I went off on one there, but it was a great question. Oh, the adaptation triangle. So yeah, so that adaptation triangle is so important because it develops circuitry to drive our behaviors, but then we need to become very, very self-aware, reflect, look inside ourselves on that to make sure that those behavioral drivers that we develop to keep us significant, safe, um, accepted, and connected are not the very same behaviors that are now causing our life to unravel in different ways or making our relationship suffer or holding me back in life. And so, yeah, that's why I believe it to be so important.
It's seems like there obviously has to be a huge mindset shift, but that obviously doesn't happen in one session, right?
Right.
So I had somebody on a couple episodes ago, Scott Rains. He's one of the pastors at Hope Ankeny, but we were talking about the meaning making model.
Mm.
So is it when you're talking about the adaptation triangle? You're familiar with the meaning making model,
Hmm.
I'm guessing, right? Is it is part of that trying to just like erase the whiteboard of what that's been your entire life and then creating a new overall meaning mindset or and if so, I mean like how long does that actually take to develop?
Right.
That seem I mean obviously again it's not overnight, but like
Mm-mm.
that seems in just in my mind like the real
Right.
challenge. I mean
Yeah.
you've been locked in this mindset for however, 30, 40 years, 50 years, and now all of a sudden you're trying to plow a new path.
Right.
I
Trying to
mean,
retrain a whole nervous system.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
that's oof.
It's framed like that. It sounds like, wow, that's a whole mountain you've got to climb. What I would say is, for me, we're not trying to whitewash the old circuitry. We're not trying to get rid of it or eliminate it in some way. We are simply trying to raise awareness to it. And I think there's something very powerful in that. And so sometimes it might still be okay to use the chainsaw, right? Sometimes you might still have some branches that need trimmed, or sometimes it might be good to feel not enough to drive you forward on a certain project or a certain aspect of your work or something like that. And so what I would reframe it as is we're just trying to raise awareness to it and create enough pause to recognize that you have a choice. You have a choice on how you respond to the moment or the circumstances rather than you always, oh my gosh, rather than you always default to the chainsaw. You always default to the old circuitry. And so you're right. If we were trying to eliminate the whole thing and start afresh, I don't even know if that's possible unless, I don't know, unless you went and did some sort of psychedelic drug treatment or something like that. Most people aren't in that position. And so for me, it's no, can we, and so part of the pause part is recognizing what does it feel like in my body when I'm about to do that thing? And if you work with people enough, they start to know, it's that tightness in my chest, it's that feeling in my throat, it's that anxiety in my stomach. And it's like, okay, that's your cue. That means that you're going to default to people pleasing, anger, whatever your mechanism is, you're gonna go there, and that's your moment to pause, assess the situation, and choose the tool for the what the moment demands. And so, yeah, no, it's not it's not a reset. It's an awareness. Most people don't realize that they're defaulting to old behaviors or old that they don't realize that they're being driven by old circuitry. It's almost like an iPhone. You've just not done the iPhone update yet. You don't need a whole new iPhone. You just need to do the update type idea. I mean, you're still running on Windows 95. I don't even know what the new one is, but so it's like a software update rather than a whole new computer. I just came up with that analogy, but I think that's actually pretty good.
There you go. You can use that one for your sessions. There you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Maybe it's not as paramount as it used to be, but there seems to be a well documented stigma around men seeking mental help. Uh, what do you actually hear from guys that come into your office as to why they were hesitant to come in, and
Yeah.
how do you shift that mindset to get them to keep coming back?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's true. I think the stigma is shifting slightly, but we've still got a long way to go. A lot of the guys that end up on my couch were sent by their wives, to be honest. And there is a stigma. I just think, I just think that it doesn't feel masculine for men. I think as men, we are, that part of our caveman brain says that we are protectors, we're providers, and going in to talk to somebody about our feelings doesn't really align with that value system. And so we also are taught to be tough. We're, you know, boys don't cry or rub dirt in it and get on with it kind of thing. Especially, in Iowa, there's also a cultural component there where it's just it doesn't feel by that definition of masculinity, it doesn't feel masculine. It doesn't really align with the tough provider, get on with it, suck it up. And what we end up doing is we kind of suffer in silence and we feel like we're just supposed to get on with it. And I think the thing that shifts with men is when they realize that it actually takes a lot more strength to turn towards yourself and share what's going on with you with somebody else than it does to not. And so I love that moment where men do. I have men that come in that are still resistant even when they're there. And so I really do just try to meet them where they're at. I'm not going to start asking them to tell me about when they were sad when they were 3. Like, that's not what we're doing. So what usually the process is I'll just meet them exactly where they're at. What's going on right now? How did you end up here? And what happens over time, we generate some rapport, hopefully, if I do my job well. And a lot of the time, men will say, well, my childhood was fine. And they've never actually really looked at all of the things and all of the events that led to them being there in that moment. And so when there's a little bit of rapport and a little bit of trust, they can start to get there. Therapy, in my opinion, for men needs to be actionable. Men don't, they're not as emotionally led as women. However, if we can connect a few dots and say, hey, okay, here's your plan. It's just like going to the gym, go get some reps, then men can relate to that because it's action oriented. They have some agency. When men are struggling, they tend to be feeling a little horizonlessness or a little bit of lacking hope. And sometimes even we don't need a full roadmap, but just a compass to point them in the right direction and say, okay, there you go work on that. And all of a sudden with that agency and feeling like they have another little bit of control over how they behave or how they interact with the world, it's amazing how much momentum that can create.
When we started the talk, you were talking about how you came from Scotland over here, and um, I know you had said, well, physically you were like great, right? But mentally, like once soccer kind of started to come more in the past, and you kind of realized it wasn't your future, uh, there was a little bit of a identity crisis there. Uh, was that one of the hardest things you had to like unlearn about
Yeah.
that belief was like soccer's not that, or for men, it could be
Sure.
whatever, right? X is not your,
Sure.
uh, identity. How do you help men separate the 2 things, whatever X may be? I know that's not who I
Right.
Yeah.
am, like, at my core. How do you help men differentiate, or even athletes too? Like, what's that specifically look like?
Yeah.
What did it look like for you?
Yeah, I'll tell you what it looked like for me because that might be the best way to sort of bring it to life a little bit. So growing up, I grew up in Clydebank, like I mentioned. Clydebank's a shipbuilding working class town. For the most part, I felt safe growing up, but you still had to be vigilant. And I also learned very quickly that if you show that you're tough, you will more than likely be left alone, right? If somebody comes at you, you go right back at them. You kind of puff your chest out. You kind of have to show you're not to be messed with, even if you're terrified inside, right? And so, two of my drivers, one was definitely toughness. Don't show weakness, don't back up, that kind of mentality. And then through the soccer thing, be impressive. As long as you're impressive, things will be good. And so those two those two adaptations drove me for a long, long time. And I would love to say that, oh, when the professional thing came to a conclusion, I figured it all out. That would be really far from the truth because what I really did was came to America and I was still being driven by those same things. I just changed the environment, but I still was being driven by being tough and by being impressive. And then college soccer comes to an end. And again, I would love to say, you know what, I figured it all out, but I didn't. I was 24 or whatever. Um, what I, and I, again, I was being driven by all these things subconsciously. And it wasn't until many years later that I started to notice this. I did my mental health counseling degree and then I didn't get licensed. What did I do? Became a soccer coach, started running soccer clubs. And I look back now and it was all the same things. I just kept changing the environment, but I was still trying to be impressive. I was still all about external validation. And I even think back to, when my contract in Scotland came to an end and then when my collegiate career came to an end, I wasn't a very good human in those moments. Now, I wasn't a evil person, but I look back now and go, "Oh, you were lost." I was out, drinking, partying too much, making not great decisions, chasing women, doing all of that stuff, doing anything to fill that external validation bucket. And I didn't know it at the time. But so so for me, I'll be super vulnerable. Got to practice what I preach, right? I got into my first marriage and I was still being driven by those things. And now there was a lot of problems with that marriage, but I mean, I need to be honest with myself and be like, yeah, you were not exactly your most authentic self either. And so it wasn't until I got divorced and I was a single dad and I'm living at my buddy's house for 10 months that I was like, oh, you need to start getting real. You need to start figuring this out because this being tough, putting on a brave front, chasing validation in all the wrong places is not going to serve you. I ended up, being whatever age I was by then, living at living at my buddy's house with a 2-year-old. I'm like, how did I end up here? So I had to get very real with myself and at that moment, and that's when I started to figure out. That's only then did I start to parse apart soccer, toughness, external validation, being impressive to who do you actually want to be? And I think, and the reason I'm describing that is I was able to build a much more authentic, beautiful life for myself over when I was able to parse those apart. And part of my work as a therapist is I want to help other people do that. It's an amazing feeling when you can be your more authentic self rather than the version of you that's driven by drivers that you're not even aware of. And so it takes a little bit of work to, sometimes it does take, I was going to swear, I don't want to swear, I'm not sure if we're allowed to, but sometimes it does take the crap to hit the fan, so to speak, to realize this is not working. This thing I'm doing, these behaviors I'm doing, this is not working. And so usually, ideally, you come to therapy before that, but men don't. Men wait till, oh shit, crisis time, right? And then that's when they end up on my couch. A strong encouragement I would put out to any men listening that are considering therapy, you don't need to wait until you're in crisis. In fact, if you come before you're in crisis, then you're going to begin the whole journey at a much more advanced starting point. But that's just not, again, protectors, providers. That's not what we do. Often therapy becomes a last resort instead of a maintenance thing, and really it should be more of a maintenance thing. So yeah, so that was the journey for me, and only then did I go, I need to start figuring out who am I versus this soccer player identity, external validation, be impressive guy. And that was some, I spent a lot of time in my thoughts and with people that I cared about, and was able to figure it all out. And I suppose that in a nutshell is the same role I would like to play as a therapist with the men that end up in my office.
Through all that story, it seemed like your environment changed quite a bit, but yet you were still who you were. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase like wherever you go, there your problems
Mm.
will be as well. So how much does environment actually shape our mental health versus something that's purely internal? And then how can we decipher between the two and say, no, it is my environment that's causing me to feel like this versus me saying I'm carrying something around that's just like constantly on my back, regardless of the circumstances that I'm in.
Right. What an incredible question. Let me pause for a second, try and make sure I give you an answer that question deserves. Yeah, environment obviously plays a huge role. There is a genetic code, right? We do have a genetic disposition towards certain behaviors. And I mean, that could be a whole other podcast. I think it makes more sense to speak to the environment piece. Obviously, with the belonging, acceptance, significance piece, as in your formative years, your environment is playing a critical, humongous, pivotal role there. And so, one of the reasons I do work with kids, but it's hard. And one of the reasons it's hard is they don't really have a lot of control of their environment compared to hopefully what people do in adulthood in most situations. And so that's why working with kids is hard, because you can do whatever work you do in an hour, but you're putting them right back into that same environment where if they don't feel safe, they're going to be constantly operating from defense mode. And so it's really hard to change a child's behavior that is in a sympathetic nervous system state. They're always just going to default to survival. And so I think the big thing for me is to speak to the environment is, okay, so my environment shaped me. I developed all these drivers that have gotten me to this point. And then for men, it's like, how is my environment, my current environment, continuing to activate some of those behaviors? And if that's the case, then can we become the architect of our own environment, right? Is there things in my environment that constantly trigger me? Can what of those triggers or those activation points, what can I have control of? Can I reconfigure or work on how my wife and I deal with conflict, for example? Or can I get a little more balance in how I approach work, whatever it may be? Sometimes you can't, some things you can control, sometimes you can't. And so for me, what I would say regarding environment is become the architect of your own environment. So what can you actually assess and look at and change? And that might be even things like your sleep health or your sleep hygiene, or can you get more movement, things like that. Can you change the things that are triggering you? If you feel very overstimulated by your kids when you get home, can you put a little mechanism in place to ground yourself before you try to move into dad mode? All of those little things are important. Now, some things you can't change. Kids are going to be kids. They're going to be loud. They're going to make messes. You know, there's certain things that cannot be changed. Your financial situation might be what it is for that moment, and so what can you architect, and then what can you accept? And if you can accept the things that activate you, that's where that pause and choose. You can anticipate. I know this is going to be a hard moment for me. So I have to be more vigilant on pausing rather than reaching default and straight for the chainsaw. And that's where the more times you pause and choose a more adaptive response, that's where the work is that you're referring to. The more times you choose a more adaptive response and it works, it's like, oh, wow, that was better. I didn't get in a fight with my wife. Oh, that was better. That was a really nice bedtime I just had with my son. Or, you know what? I felt way more present tonight after work, or whatever the case is. The more times you choose the adaptive response, well, the neuroplasticity in your brain, the more times those neurons fire, and the easier it becomes to pause and choose the adaptive response. And so, yeah, environment is so important. So I would say, what can you architect? And then for the things that you can't architect, can we anticipate and practice pausing and choosing? I don't know if that hits your
Oh, yeah.
question or not.
Well, and speaking about that, you had mentioned sleep, movement, other choices. How much do you talk about lifestyle choices in your work? Like, I mean, you had mentioned earlier in regards to like the youth sports culture in our country, like we're overscheduled, overstimulated. Like sleep is probably uh, not on everyone's at the top of everyone's list. There's a lack of an active lifestyle in our culture, alcoholism,
Mm.
poor dieting choices, perhaps. How much of those things are legitimate factors to consider, or is it more of a mental uh, exercise that we need to consider? Or is it obviously, I'm sure the answer is nuanced, but
It's the answer is nuanced, which means that it's another fantastic question. And so, yeah, so for me, my ultimate long-term goal with my clients is to get to the root cause. Where's the pain? Where is the wound? Now, if you are already a little resistant to therapy and it's day one, we're probably not going to get there. I had a client last week who came in and said, "Hey, it's been a year. There's something I got to tell you that is probably the root of all of this." And so sometimes, I mean, it can take a year. That's a rare exception, but we can only really get to the root and get to the heavy sometimes when we're ready. And so what I've found with men is we want to activate change. We want to feel like we have control. And so I guess it's a top down or bottom up. Which way do you go? And I'm not trying to sit on the fence, but I do try to do both, right? So ultimately I want to get to the small T and big T trauma and what's driving all of this. What's at the root of all of this? That for me is where the transformational moments live. But sometimes it takes a little while to get there. And so in the meantime, it's like, well, what can we architect? What can we build? Because it's no secret. If you have better sleep hygiene, you're gonna feel better. If you move your body, you're gonna feel better. If you go outside and get some sun in your eyes and be in nature, you're gonna feel better. It's not that's I know that some therapists don't really entertain that stuff too much, but I'm all about it. It's gotta be both. And so I'm a big fan of, in the absence of doing deep trauma work with a man that's not ready to do that, I'm like, okay, Well, what can we do? Well, where are we at? Well, what's your sleep hygiene like? How can we move our body? How can we consume for a big one? A big one is the acceleration of how our smartphones have disrupted our lives, right? People are, I don't know what's going on. I just don't feel good. Well, what do you do when you get home from work? Oh, just scroll on TikTok for 4 hours. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's start there. And so there's lots of ways to approach therapy. There's lots of modalities. There's lots of styles. And so for me, I just like to go, where you at? What's going on? Let's start right there. And then that usually leads to where we need to get to. But if where we need to start is helping somebody to wake up, go to bed earlier and wake up earlier and spend less time doom scrolling, then okay, then let's start right there. We'll get to the other stuff. We'll get, because usually if people are eating too much, consuming too much alcohol, constantly doom scrolling, you name the vice. For me, I always think, okay, where's the pain? Because those are all just firefighting behaviors. Those are all just escape behaviors. And it's like, well, something doesn't feel at peace. We're escaping something there. But if we need to start on just working with the behaviors, I'm all about it, 100%. I mean, and I try to live through that too, right? I try to get good sleep, wake up, go to the gym, eat eat things that make me feel good, etc. So I obviously need to live through, practice what you preach. But for men, it's like that thing when men have a breakup. It's like, see you in the gym, king. But it's true. It's true, right? If you sleep good, if you move your body, you get endorphins from that. And if cleaning up those behaviors on the top end give you just enough capacity and wherewithal to start edging towards the root of some of this stuff, then if that's where we're at, that's where we're at. Let's go.
A couple more questions, and then we'll close here. You had mentioned someone by the name of Jason Wilson in our earlier conversations.
Uh huh.
Um, Someone who's got some work on masculinity and emotional healing that's been meaningful to you. So, uh, who is he, and why is his message so important to you?
Yeah. Jason Wilson's an author. He's written a couple of books. The Man the Moment Demands is one of them. Boys Don't Cry, I believe, is the other one. Hopefully, I got those titles right. I think I did. He does work with young men. He's got a place called Cave of Odello where the young men learn jujitsu skills, but ultimately they're learning how to be an effective young man. And the Man the Moment Demands, even in the title, it really speaks to a lot of the themes that we've already been discussing today. Because what the Man the Moment demands is, the idea is, what is the circumstance? What is the job? And can I show up in the way that that moment demands rather than defaulting to old behaviors, especially when we move into moments of duress or stress or high stakes moments? Often we default to those old behaviors that can often be destructive or sabotaging in some way. And so his work really speaks to me because it's very masculine. It makes sense to men. It's specific to men. And it he does it in a way where we have to have compassion for those older versions of ourselves. Those tools that we developed are not bad. They're not like some evil traits. Those are tools that we developed to keep us safe and keep us acceptable and get us through. And so we're honoring those tools, but we're also we're also empowering ourselves to be able to select the right tool for the job in the moment. And it's not always the same as a man. I think we're fooling ourselves if we do. I've got to show up right now differently in this podcast as I will for whoever my first client is today. In fact, I got to show up differently for different clients sometimes. They need different versions of me. And then I'm going to go coach 3-year-old soccer. I'm going to need to act all goofy and enthusiastic. And then maybe one of my other sons will, make a negative comment to his mom, and I'll have to show up different there. And it's empowering yourself with the ability to show up with the right tool in the right moment is is what he does. And the thing that I love about it is he does it in such a compassionate way that makes it okay for men to reflect on their behaviors, lead with emotion, get vulnerable about that emotion, own the stuff of the past, and it's okay to cry. It's okay to be emotional. It's okay to be that all those different versions of yourself. So yeah, he's I think it's probably just speaks to me because it aligns very well with how I like to approach my work as a therapist.
Yeah. And just to touch on that a little bit, working in healthcare, I've seen time and time again where uh, there's come across very many situations where a life changing disaster suddenly arrives on your door, and unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people just not have the tools on how to process
Mm.
what's going on. Because, in those moments, is it rarely ever isolated? You're having to deal with so many other secondary factors, but they're unfortunately there and you need to show up. But it's, um, yeah, it's really tough and it can get overwhelming so fast
Mhm.
about like, oh, my brother just was in a severe car accident and he's never going to be the same again. Or
Mhm.
my child just showed up in the ER and this will be the day that our lives forever change. And yeah, unfortunately, and I'm not saying I'd be any better in the situation, but um, people just aren't equipped in those moments to
Right.
be able to be vulnerable or to ask for help and seek guidance when it's an emergency. It's like it's okay.
Yeah.
You're not. We don't. Nobody expects you to be perfect in those situations.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all. Yeah, there's the little T traumas, right? There's the way you interact with your caregivers and what school was like or what team or how a coach treated you and things. But then there is those capital T big moments that will definitely shape you too. And yeah, those can be tougher. I think we talk about being the man the moment demands, but if something like that happens, I think you have to have compassion with yourself. That will definitely blow past all circuitry and put you right into a survival state. And I try to help men with that all the time. A lot of men go through kind of a shame cycle, where they'll get pushed into defaulting to what might be perceived as negative behaviors, and then they regulate, and then they feel terrible about it. And that shame cycle can be tough because it can be compounding, and shame sits on your nervous system in a really heavy way. And then it's hard to move through it. And I think, we, in those moments, we literally don't have access to our prefrontal cortex. All rational thought and insight is out the window, and we're just operating on pure survival. So yeah, I can't imagine what those moments must be like in over there in your place. It's tough.
So, for someone that's sitting on the fence about whether or not they should reach out for help, what's the first step in heading towards that direction? And what do you wish they understood about what therapy actually is before they decide to walk into your door?
Great question. I would say, first of all, therapy is not only for people in crisis. So that would be the first one. And maybe I would say therapy is not necessarily like you see on the movies. Definitely not like it's on Shrinking or a show like that.
I love that show, by the way.
I know, I do too. But just like soccer's not like Ted Lasso, it's a show, and so we shouldn't use that as our blueprint for what it's actually like. I think it's important that it's also important to remember not all are the same. There's a lot of different approaches, a lot of different modalities. And what I would say is it's absolutely okay to one, not wait until you're in crisis. And it's also okay to find the person that's a good fit for you. because what I've learned over my years as a therapist is, yes, I am trained in different modalities and different tools that I can use to as interventions in session, but there's nothing more important or powerful than just attunement. If I could be so well versed in all these tools, but if this person's not really buying into me or the rapport's off, forget about it. It's pointless. And I might not be the therapist for everyone, and same for the next person. So it's okay to look around, and it is okay to start with somebody. And if it doesn't work out, I hear this a lot. Well, I tried therapy, it didn't work. It's like, ooh, you tried one therapist. Let's maybe try again. It's okay. That would be the two things. Don't wait till you're in crisis. And well, I guess three things. It's not like it is on the movies. And it's okay to pause and be selective and choose a therapist that works well for you. That's a good fit.
And with that, we'll call it a day. Ross, thank you so much for your time. I'd love to have you back, man. I think we just scratched the surface. There's so many
Oh,
just different pathways we can go into, and
it's unbelievable, isn't it?
yeah,
That's what I can't believe the time already. No, it's such an honor, Matt. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And I agree. I think we just scratched the surface. I feel like I could sit here all day and just chat. So thanks for your time. It's been a real pleasure.
awesome. And until next time, everybody, we'll see you again. Take care. Bye bye. Look at that. It went by
Nice
fast, man.
job, man. I
Yeah.
can't believe it's 10:25. What the
We
heck?
burned through it, dude. Yeah.
We did.
But you know
We
what?
did.
We covered so much.
We did, man. That was